Hi, this is Mark. In this video, I'm going to explain why I believe atheism is on the rise. There's a few reasons. To start, we consider a field, like the beginning of time. Um, Everything was remained open. Like, think of this as a field, the possible field. So basically, this range is anything that resides out here. This is speculation, conjecture, intuition, dot dot dot, so forth. Um, this is partially, I've noticed a pattern that it seems, and this is, I noticed like people from Africa tend to have high degree of faith in intuition. And this is interesting, this pattern, because think about progression. So if we consider US, so what's actually happening with most over time? So basically progression, let's say this was arrival. So there was like very minuscule progression, minuscule. We arrive, we're definitely moving up. And then there reaches a technological boom renaissance. And what ends up happening is there always exists some upper limits. And if we go now, if we translate, so let's see Africa, the same, spelled that wrong. So Africa, same time range. So basically right here, it's the same point. They're not as progressed. So basically it's offsets. So it's going to occur, eventually it's starting to pick up, you're going to catch up, it's going to extend, so forth. And there's always going to be that limit, but basically the time, there's an offset between these events. And of course, for instance, right here, Africa's lower. So basically, right here, we're noticing now, in the US especially, what's happening is this field it slowly expands. So eventually, through time, so this is like the think of knowledge base. So our knowledge base is going to be proportional to the radius of this think of nucleus. We're representing it as a nucleus. So basically, it starts at a point and then becomes progressively larger, so forth. So it's just like, we have an atom. There's an atom, nucleus, this has mass, so forth. You have electron fields, so forth. And then you also have, think of information density, even though literally it doesn't have density, but think of it as, because we organize it, we're organizing information. We're taking bits of information randomly scattered in chaos, and we're basically causing the bits to become closer together or more connected, because there's links between these. So essentially it's starts with divergence. So basically we're going outward because we have to perceive, and then divergence, and then convergence, so forth. So of course the knowledge field is increasing, but it's interesting because we consider a few things. we're going to consider this as a vector. Think of the field, this is a vector. Now we're going to take the point, the radius, this vector is basically proportional. So this is the growth potential. So in the beginning, think about like in mathematics when it started initially, there was so much growth potential. We didn't know anything at that time. So nowadays, you try to create something, it's already been created most likely. Very difficult to create something new. So therefore, we have to create new fields or subfields, and that becomes increasingly difficult. So when that ends up happening, now, if we go to this scenario, the nucleus, it gets larger. Again, we're considering now the vector coming out of here. This vector relates to our knowledge, growth of knowledge base. Dang it. Knowledge base. So basically this is like transmission of info, so forth, accessibility of info, ... So clearly over time, the accessibility increases, the transmission because of globalization. So therefore, the vector increases. And by this, we know this the growth potential, it's going to inevitably decrease because, and I'll explain in a few reasons why. Of course, anything, a lot like what we believe is, now is this basically observable? Well, I think the clear reason, the logic for this is we have put this in multiple videos, but I'm just gonna illustrate the point. So this is for projection from our eye. So we have like a range of perception that is bounded. Range of perception. So the range could go in the macro direction, and so forth. So this is macro or infinity, or it's tending to infinity, even though infinity doesn't exist. And this is micro, nullity, empty space, so forth. And then our range is constricted between like a limit upper and limit lower. And it could change, this could actually increase span over time, but not to such a high rate. You could argue that yes, it increases proportional to our complexity to some degree, but the initial range was we could perceive three-dimensional, so forth. It's not like we're going well beyond that anytime soon. Sure, there's mental illnesses that expand the range, and you have more dopamine, you expand the range, but again, we notice like a little bit higher of a frequency or more information flow or more chaos, and it's hard. Psychosis is really just an opening of the field. It becomes too chaotic for our mind to adapt, and our mind isn't adapted to that. Maybe in the future, we could move, but it's such a slow progression. And basically, based on this, there's always an upper bound, just like I showed right here. it's based on population. So this growth is based on population density and globalization. And so basically we already satisfy like globalization. Population density is being depreciated. We're reaching this upper limits. In the US and in Brazil, they're having 12 births per household or somewhere around there. The probability of having a genius is much higher, but in the US we've reached the not the tipping point. I mean, eventually there could be war and so forth. It's going to depreciate there's always nature, follows a certain direction. But yeah, population is decreasing, therefore the potential energy is being limited. Yes, we have more accessibility to knowledge and so forth, so that's why that's expanding. But at the same time, it's very hard to open new fields because they've generally been created. In the beginning, it was very easy to open subfields. So like generally what we have is, we have a field. Think of like mathematics. This is just one instance, and there's multiple overlapping subfields that have overlapping components, like right here. Some possibly, and then there's some other fields that may be growing in the exterior fringes, but as well, the probability of opening a new field is dim because a lot of times it's going to be within. It's going to reside within this subfield. It's the probability as it opens more space, just like in globalization or what is happening. It's like this, but in the beginning, we had this empty. It was empty, and now we have this. So we're basically limiting the vector and the outer vector, and therefore, but the knowledge, it's easier to spread knowledge and information. So we're collecting a lot of information. You can learn so many different things nowadays. So what this is implying is, let's consider the outer vector. So the outer vector through time So the outer vector, or magnitude, in time. So it started very high, and then it gets depreciated. It started like at, say this is potential, the potential that we had, and then it's a depreciating or negative decay, so forth. So it reaches a, say, limit 1. And then this is the inner vector. Let's do inner vector. Magnitude. So basically this started at 0, and it's kind of approaching another limit. Limit 2. But now, so basically as, this is approaching 0. So as limit 1 approaches 0, limit 2 approaches limit 1. So essentially, we can suppose this is like the maximum potential range, and then our knowledge base has to approach that. So therefore, we know like limit, we know that like the limit, the upper bound, or this is like the max. So this is the max value. And then right here, the absolute max right here is going to be approaching it. So essentially, the absolute, So essentially what's happening is information is we're going to converge. So essentially, you can think of like once the outer potential becomes depreciated, we're catching up to the upper limits. So basically, um, that what that implies is that there's going to be really stagnation. So this implies stagnation, not absolute stagnation, but we're going in that direction. And essentially, the it's going to be more likely to become confined to the this bounded system. So it's a lot easier when there's information going everywhere, and it's easier to consider being an expert and understanding the totality of the universe based on the bounded system. But that's not how it works, because our range of perception is bounded, therefore the possibilities are infinite expansion beyond that range. And therefore there's a lot that we do not know and a lot that we can't comprehend. And basically I just think I've noticed this pattern because Africans tend to put faith on intuition a lot, and it makes sense because we started with speculation, conjecture, and intuition. We started with this, but as the field grows, like in this case, how would I put it? Now, like in the future, so well into the future. So basically, we started with time. So this is t equals 0. So basically, let's not the scale. This isn't the scale. It starts with a point. And of course, again, I was pointing in the potential is great to expand, and it's limited because we don't have much to ground our ideas. We don't have much. So then it grows. Due to globalization, this field kind of, expands. With more accessibility, we can gain more knowledge. But then it gets harder to progress. We start becoming more constrained. And then it's basically becoming very more minuscule. And this is becoming larger. But this should be less than the previous, or basically, we're never going to be beyond the absolute potential or the absolute limit that is possible based on our range of perception. But so these vectors are not like it to scale either, but what's this showing? That we're catching up to the upper bound. Basically this is implying we're catching up to that absolute, that limit. And this is of course based on the S-curve. The S-curve I was showing over here. Because of that, progression is, and so forth, outer progression. And we are putting, so basically now we're putting, we have facts, we have data, we have objectivity, we have contradictions, you could say it's evidence, ... So it started with like speculation, intuition. We didn't have the field of logic yet. And now we're transgressing to this. So this is why, because contradiction, so forth. So we take a contradiction, for instance. This is another reason. We're gonna do transmission of information now. Transmission of information. So this is gonna be, hold on a sec. Transmission. So basically transmission of info. So this is proportional to this timeline. So we're going to start here. We're going to go here. We're going to go here. Okay, so we start with transmission. So we usually have like a point and a line. Let's just say there's one line. So now here we have a point. Now we have multiple pathways due to globalization. Now here, it's becoming it's going towards infinity. So the number of pathways, say this is a 1, say this is like 5, this is like, let's just say 100, and then it's going to infinity. So let's apply if we have contradiction. So if there's a contradiction, we're basically transmitting it, and it's causing more influence. This is why social media is influencing us. This is why, because the information, we're being swayed based on the information. So we are converging to essentially the environment as well. We are becoming a function of the properties itself. We're permutations. That's our existence. Our minds are basically an aggregate of all permutations that exist, all the information that is being dispersed. The uniqueness is based on our genetic code, and a little, more than that. It goes beyond that, our consciousness, so forth, and our awareness. But again, it's permutations, combinations, possibilities. We only go through one. We only take one route. We only take one direction. Out of the infinite many routes that we could take, we only take one. So there's a uniqueness there. But again, this is kind of showing if we project facts, data, objectivity in 100, infinitely many directions, it's going to hit the target that many times. Influence is proportional to how many times, it hits, like it changes. If someone tells you so many times, eventually, or it's repeated, like the data, the facts, or the evidence, or so forth, is somehow repeated and repeated and repeated, and that somehow pinpoints to one direction or the other, it's going to cause influence. So this is kind of the reason. That's just my take on things. My belief is, you can't prove or disprove, and you shouldn't do so. There's a lot of beliefs that we currently exhibit, or we may believe something is true when in actuality it's going to be false in the future. The system is not perfect. There's error bounds. It's proportional to the range of our mind. Because our range of perception is bounded, the error increases. So this kind of correlates to error bound. Last thing I want to talk about. So the error bound range of perception. This is global error bound. So as range of perception increases, error bound decreases. And this makes perfect sense. It approaches 0. So basically we're approaching 0. So as range of perception approaches infinity, even though it doesn't exist, as a quantity, error bound approaches 0. So that's a key criteria. Because R is bounded, it's finite, it exists, the error bound, therefore we make mistakes all the time. Our contradictions could be a mistake, and so forth. It's just based on what we know. And Therefore, something that's well beyond our grasp cannot be comprehended. And I think I've noticed this pattern. I've noticed a lot of mathematicians believed in God, like Gauss, who example mathematicians. Gauss, one of arguably the greatest mathematician of all time. Newton, they believe in God, but I've noticed that a lot of evolutionary biologists or other scientists who utilize external validation or sources or evidence from the external world as validity tend to go the other direction. So there is definitely a pattern existing here. I think it has to do with the fact that mathematicians, it's more symbolic. It's more. This is more of the. They probably consider probability and chaos theory. Again, it's predicated on faith. It's something that we don't know, but you got to consider what is the probability of the world starting, and but the random nature. I like to think if this were true, like I had someone who told me the last thing I'm going to do is you take an arrow and you're pointing this random. This is random position. You go. Let's just say this is infinity. This distance is minuscule, and you take a point. So eventually, the arrow is going to hit the point if time goes on to infinity. Now here's the range. So let's say there's a radius. So basically, the arrow is targeting until it hits the. This is random, of course. Until it finally hits, the target. The dispersion is eventually going to. It's eventually going to if time is infinite progression. But the thing is, there's a distance. There's a deviance. We got this distance. We got this distance. There's from here to here. There's a deviance. So this is a distance, and it's proportional to error. Basically, hitting it, it's like true. Okay, it hits. It's basically or that was the correct placement. That was the correct. But anything that deviates beyond that, it should be proportional. The distance from that should be proportional to error bound. And you could argue that yes, over time, it gets more and more. The error bound approaches zero. You could but I like to think of how can the universe even contain itself, the symmetry, the alignment of the forces in perfect succession. Space is clearly warped, and it's very hard. Basically, on an infinitesimal scale, the forces, the vectors, have to be orientated in such a way such that the universe can somehow contain itself without collapse. And if there was a multi-universe, it would be very difficult that there wouldn't be external influence due to the error based on the random generation. And, unless there was mutual exclusive events or universes. And we don't know that, of course. But again, I don't know. That's my take on this part. Of course, I like to think of it as an error because it was if anything is random or by chance, eventually, yes, it could create complexity and, the target could be hit, but I just think, the immensity of the time to do so is, and just the probability wise, it just seems very, 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 very unlikely. So yes, from a mathematical perspective, seems unlikely, very unlikely. And I think that's what Gauss, he also thought that, and Newton, and so forth. Yeah, so that's all I have right now. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next.